There's a part of you that doesn't belong in polite conversation. A part that slips between the cracks of your laughter, evades every affirmation, and curls up in silence when the world expects you to be composed. It lives in that quiet space, late at night, long after the lights go out, when you're lying still and there's no one left to impress. You feel it, don't you? That unnamed pull in your gut, the strange cocktail of longing, discomfort, confusion. It's not about sex. Not exactly. It's not about love either. It's something deeper, more primal, more complicated. It's about power, shame, need, control, the kind of raw desire that doesn't fit into neat little boxes. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the Psyphos Depth channel and join our community where you'll get early access to new videos and insights on personal and spiritual growth. Also, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. We'd love to hear your voice in this journey of self-exploration. Now, let's get started. Most people never speak of this part of themselves. Not to friends, not to partners, sometimes not even to themselves. Instead, we joke, we distract, we scroll, we moralize. We build beautiful cages of rationality and call them maturity. We learn to survive by slicing away the parts of ourselves that don't conform, the chaotic, the strange, the unspoken urges that scream for expression. But the body always remembers. The unconscious never forgets. Carl Jung had the courage to name what others feared: the sexual shadow. Not to be destroyed, not to be condemned, but to be integrated. And integration, as Jung taught, begins with a reckoning, because if you don't make peace with this part of yourself, it doesn't go away. It just waits. It sharpens in the dark. Then it erupts, not with warning, but with force. Addiction, obsession, emotional detachment, patterns that repeat themselves like haunted rhythms. You try to change, but something deeper pulls the strings. And that's what Jung saw so clearly. This isn't dysfunction, it's disconnection. Your sexual shadow isn't only the repressed erotic impulses. It's every piece of your sexual identity that's been buried under shame. The fantasies you judged, the desires you never let speak, the vulnerability you swallowed whole because someone once said it was too much. It's the part of you that was exiled long before you had language for it. The teenage you that was curious, the child you that was honest, the adult you that tried to fit into a world that wanted order, not complexity. You wonder why you can't feel during sex, why you chase thrill but fear intimacy, why you need to be seen but panic when someone looks too closely. Maybe you crave dominance or submission or silence or chaos, and maybe you hate yourself for it. You call it dysfunction, but that's not quite right. I believe what you're calling dysfunction is actually a disowned truth begging to come home. What if your so-called dysfunction is your soul resisting a mask? We live in a society that is obsessed with sexuality and terrified of its truth. We sell products using sex. We whisper about it in marketing, tease it in fashion, but we never stop and ask what it's really about, to us, personally, spiritually, intimately. What does your desire say about who you are? And here's the uncomfortable truth. The more you suppress it, the more power it holds over you. It leaks out in dreams, in tension, in those 3 a.m. thoughts you can't quite name. The shadow doesn't scream. Sometimes it whispers. Other times it detaches. A numbness so subtle, so well-dressed, you mistake it for maturity. You call it low libido, just stress, or growing up. But if you listen closely, you'll hear something else entirely. Grief. Grief for the versions of you that never had a safe place to unfold. Grief for the attraction you locked away. Grief for the tenderness that was labeled weakness. Grief for the wild, unapologetic current of your sexual nature that was taught to stay silent. Jung didn't ask us to obey this shadow, nor to reject it. He asked us to know it, to sit beside it without flinching, to ask it why it's there, what it remembers, what it needs. And when you begin that dialogue, the whole landscape of your inner world starts to shift. You stop running from yourself. You stop performing. You stop apologizing for being human. This isn't about acting on every desire that crosses your mind. It's about asking why it's there, what it's showing you, what piece of your story it's trying to reawaken. Because behind every sexual shadow is something sacred. Not sin, not sickness, but a call for integration. Emotional, energetic, even soul-level integration. The truth is, your shadow isn't the part of you that's dangerous. It's the part of you that's been made dangerous by being ignored. You see, your sexuality is more than physical. It's symbolic, archetypal. It's the language your psyche uses to say, this is where you're split. And that's why it holds so much weight. Not because it's dirty, but because it's powerful. And when power gets buried, it doesn't disappear. It mutates. It becomes projection. You think the desire is about someone else, but it's about the you that hasn't been met. If you've ever felt ashamed of what turns you on, if you've ever hated yourself for what you crave, if you've ever pushed away a person who made you feel something real, not because they were wrong, but because they saw too much, you're not alone. You're human, but you're also fragmented, and fragmentation always cries out for wholeness. There's a difference between healing and polishing. Healing means facing your wounds. Polishing means hiding them better. And most people are taught to polish, to curate an image of someone in control, well-adjusted, spiritual, enlightened. But the body knows when it's being lied to. The soul knows when it's not being seen. That's why, even when everything looks fine on the outside, something inside still aches. Something waits. Jung warned us, what we do not make conscious will come back as fate. And nowhere does that ring louder than in the realm of sexual energy. Because this energy, more than almost anything else, holds a mirror to your deepest wounds and your deepest instincts in the same breath. When it's repressed, it manifests in relationships that confuse you, in behaviors you can't explain, in longings you try to ignore but never quite escape. And the cost of ignoring it is steep. Over time, you stop expecting magic. You stop trusting intimacy. You mistake safety for disconnection, and you call it love. But deep down, you know something's missing. So the question is not, do I have a sexual shadow? You do. The question is, will you meet it before it meets you? Maybe it already has. Maybe your sexual shadow has met you in the way your breath catches during a scene in a film you weren't prepared to react to. Maybe it showed up in the unexplainable desire you felt for someone you couldn't morally justify, or in the secret tabs on your browser you rushed to close. Maybe it speaks through your silence, or the way you tense up when your partner touches you in a certain way. You keep thinking you're choosing your desires. But what if they're choosing you? What if the parts of you you've locked away have never stopped searching for ways to be felt? This is how the unconscious works. It doesn't speak in logic. It speaks in patterns, in compulsions, in discomfort. It speaks in attraction and revulsion, two sides of the same mirror. And the more you repress, the louder it gets. Not always with noise, sometimes with detachment. A slow dulling of sensation. You go through the motions, you perform intimacy, You smile, you laugh, you touch. But underneath, something remains untouched. And that's what breaks relationships. Not conflict, not infidelity, vacancy. You think you're functioning. You go to work. You pay your bills. You sleep beside someone. But something's not alive. You've mistaken surviving for living, and your partner starts to feel it. They don't know what's wrong. They just feel the absence. It's like reaching for someone through glass, and slowly, without knowing why, they stop reaching. Jung understood this all too well. He believed the psyche doesn't develop as one cohesive whole. It fragments to survive. And sexuality is one of the first casualties of this fragmentation. Because when you're young and you feel something powerful, something wordless, and it's met with shame or silence, you learn fast. You split. You exile that energy. You build a self around what's acceptable, what's safe. But the cost is enormous. You lose access to a part of your life force. And when life force is buried, it doesn't disappear. It becomes distorted. That's why some people live double lives, one polished and perfect, the other chaotic and compulsive, and they hate themselves for it. They think they're weak, broken. But it's not weakness, it's disconnection. They are simply playing out the battle between their mask and their truth. You know this, don't you? That feeling of being pulled in two directions. Wanting to be free, but also needing to stay hidden. Wanting connection, but terrified of being seen. That's the tension of the shadow. And until you face it, you will continue to seek what hurts you and reject what heals you. Desire doesn't vanish just because you deny it. It gets louder. In your body, your thoughts, your behaviors. You'll notice yourself triggered by people who embody what you've suppressed. Maybe it's their confidence, their sensuality, their softness, their unapologetic joy. You'll want to be near them, or push them away, or save them, or punish them. But what you're really trying to do is reclaim yourself. Jung called this projection. And it's not just a psychological idea. It's something you feel viscerally. The woman who drives you crazy, the man who makes you uncomfortable, the people you secretly envy or quietly shame. They are mirrors, reflections of your disowned self. And if you have the courage to stop judging and start listening, they can lead you back to what you've forgotten. Everything that irritates you about others, Jung said, can lead to an understanding of yourself. And nowhere is this more obvious and more uncomfortable than in the domain of sexuality. Because sex is not just about pleasure. It's about vulnerability, power, expression, control, being seen, being accepted in your most animal, most honest form. No makeup, no posturing, just truth, naked and trembling. And when you haven't made peace with your own truth, you will resent anyone who has. So what do? You pause, you feel, you ask. What does this desire want from me? What part of me is trying to return? Where did I learn this was bad? And who benefits from me staying fragmented? Because make no mistake, there is an entire culture invested in keeping you split from yourself. From religion to advertising, from school to social norms, everything teaches you to fear the parts of you that can't be commodified. The wild parts, the intuitive parts, the sensual, deeply feeling, unapologetically present parts. They are not profitable, but they are powerful. And when you begin to reclaim them, you become very difficult to control. And here's what no one tells you. Wholeness is terrifying. It breaks the rules. It shatters identities. It threatens the structures that gave you a false sense of safety. But it's also where freedom begins. When you stop moralizing your shadow and start understanding it, something in you softens. You don't need to perform. You don't need to prove. You don't need to chase a version of yourself that's acceptable to others. Because you are no longer fragmented, you are integrating. And integration isn't always neat. It's messy. It's confusing. Sometimes it looks like crying after sex. Sometimes it means admitting your fantasies out loud for the first time. Sometimes it's breaking up with someone you love because they only know the version of you that hides. Sometimes it's shaking with fear and saying, "This is who I really am," and letting someone see you not despite it, but because of it. And that moment, that trembling, terrifying honesty, is the first crack in the shell, the first breath of wholeness. Jung never promised this journey would be comfortable, but he promised it would be real. And in a world built on image, performance, and denial, real is a kind of sacred rebellion. So here's the invitation. Let the discomfort speak. Let the desire speak. Not to act on it blindly, not to control it tightly, but to let it be heard, to give it language, to give it a seat at the table. Because when you do that, the dynamic shifts. The shame no longer holds you hostage. The silence no longer defines you. The shadow stops chasing you, because now you're facing it. And that's the beginning of becoming whole. And when you begin to face it, really face it, not as a problem to fix, but as a voice to understand, your relationship with desire changes. It's no longer something you fear, something that hijacks your behavior or traps you in guilt loops. It becomes a compass, a guide. Not because every desire should be acted upon, but because every desire carries a message. The shadow doesn't demand obedience. It asks for honesty. Honesty is rare in this domain. Most people speak about sexuality with either bravado or silence. We brag, we joke, we avoid, or we sterilize it entirely, wrapping it in layers of spirituality or self-mastery until it loses all connection to the body. But the body remembers. Your nervous system remembers. Your skin remembers every moment it wasn't allowed to speak. Every time it was taught to be quiet, to shrink, to conform. That's what repression does. It teaches the body to perform and the soul to hide. And hiding takes energy, immense, relentless energy. People walk around exhausted, thinking they're tired from work, from responsibilities, from aging. But beneath that tiredness is often a more sacred kind of fatigue, the exhaustion of self-suppression, of holding down your truth day after day until you forget what it feels like to be fully alive. Jung understood that what we call neurosis is often just the result of avoiding necessary suffering. That doesn't mean indulgence. It doesn't mean giving in to every impulse. But it means stopping long enough to ask, where am I hurting? And what am I avoiding feeling? Because avoidance doesn't make the pain go away. It makes the pain grow roots. The sexual shadow grows in silence. It thrives on neglect. And it gets louder the more we pretend it doesn't exist. This is why you might find yourself triggered out of nowhere. Someone touches your arm and you flinch. A scene in a movie makes your stomach twist. A compliment makes you blush and feel ashamed in the same breath. These aren't overreactions. They're signals, echoes from the places in you that were never allowed to speak. If you listen, if you stop turning away, you'll begin to hear a pattern, a story, your story. One you didn't write consciously, but that has shaped your relationships, your attractions, your boundaries, your guilt. The stories you carry in your sexual shadow aren't just yours. They're inherited from family, from culture, from generations of people who were also taught to suppress, to disconnect, to be appropriate. But you don't have to carry it forward. You don't have to keep performing someone else's idea of who you should be. There's a different kind of sexuality, one that doesn't seek validation or power, but seeks truth. A sexuality rooted in presence, in embodiment, in freedom. It might not look like the movies, it might not fit the scripts you've memorized, but it will feel like coming home. This is not about perfection. You'll still have fear, you'll still stumble, but now you'll do it awake. And when you're awake, every interaction becomes an opportunity to heal. Every reaction becomes a moment to reclaim. You start to notice the moments you abandon yourself and choose not to. You notice when you're shrinking and choose to stay. Because presence isn't about always feeling good. It's about being real. And when you're real, desire becomes sacred again. Not something to market, not something to hide, not something to manipulate or be manipulated by, but a force. A living, breathing expression of your inner world, longing to move through you with clarity and care. People often ask, but how do I know if it's a shadow or a true desire? The truth is, most of the time, it's both. The shadow often wraps around what's most true. It distorts it, makes it confusing. But when you sit with it long enough, the distortion begins to dissolve, and you're left with something purer, a need, a longing, a truth that was waiting underneath. That's where healing begins, not by cutting off desire, but by meeting it, not by moralizing it, but by asking what it's pointing to. Often, our wildest, strangest fantasies carry the deepest truths. They aren't always meant to be acted on, but they are meant to be listened to. Because they show us where we've been wounded, where we've been silenced, where we've been fragmented. And the goal is not to act. The goal is to integrate, to bring these parts back into the whole. When you begin to do this, something radical happens. You stop craving validation. You stop seeking partners who only reflect your wounds. You stop chasing intensity just to feel alive. Because now you are alive, not in performance, but in presence. And presence changes everything. It changes how you touch, how you look, how you speak, how you listen. It brings you into the moment, where intimacy isn't about performance, but about connection. Where sex is no longer a stage, but a ritual. Where you don't need to be perfect, just honest. Jung once said that wholeness is the union of opposites. Nowhere is that union more urgent than in your relationship with desire. You are not wrong for wanting. You are not broken for feeling. You are not dangerous because of your hunger. But you are at risk if you keep dividing yourself between who you are and who you think you should be. The shadow will not remain silent forever, and if you don't open the door, it will break through the wall, not to hurt you, but to remind you, you're still here, you're still whole, you're still worthy of being fully alive. Let it speak now, gently, before it returns as fate. You think you're in control, that you're consciously choosing who you're attracted to, who you open up to, who you pursue, and who you avoid. But beneath every one of those decisions is a deeper architecture, a blueprint etched not in logic, but in silence, shame, memory, and conditioning. A map of your desire written before you even had words for it. This map wasn't created with your permission. It was built through moments. Some you remember, some you've buried. Moments when a look made you feel exposed, when your curiosity was met with punishment. when your honesty about what you felt in your body was called dirty, wrong, or too much. These moments didn't disappear. They rearranged the furniture in your psyche. They whispered, "Hide this part. It's not welcome here." And so you did. And the cost? Intimacy that feels like performance. Touch that feels like pressure. Attraction that makes you ashamed. Love that doesn't quite land. You can be with someone for years, sleep next to them, kiss them, talk about the weather and the bills, and still never let them see you. Not really, because the you they know is curated, safe, sanitized, acceptable, but not alive. You don't do this on purpose. You think you're protecting them, or protecting yourself. But what you're really protecting is the wound, the old belief that if they saw all of you, they'd leave, that your full self is too dangerous to be loved. And so you become a ghost in your own life. You touch but don't feel, smile but don't mean it, stay in relationships that numb you and sabotage the ones that wake you up. You call this maturity, responsibility, stability. But deep down, you know something is missing. A fire that once moved through you, a spark. You don't talk about it. You assume it was just youth, or hormones, or a phase. But it wasn't. It was you, before you were taught to disappear. Jung called this disintegration, the slow unraveling of the self, not through trauma, but through a refusal to feel. And we've normalized it. We've built entire lives around numbness, careers, marriages, religions. We call it being good, being pure, being disciplined. But it's none of those things. It's being disconnected, half awake, half alive. You see it everywhere. We live in a world that is hypersexualized and emotionally sterile. We use sex to sell everything, from shoes to burgers to toothpaste. But ask someone how they feel about their own desire. Silence. Ask them where their hunger comes from, what it's asking for, what it reminds them of. Discomfort, shame, avoidance. Because society doesn't want your wholeness. It wants your confusion, your performance. The more divided you are from your truth, the easier it is to distract, monetize, manipulate. And that's exactly what happens. We end up chasing shadows, not just in relationships, but in our creativity, our spirituality, our sense of meaning. Everything slows down, feels flat, because the core engine, the primal creative energy of your being, is blocked. So you procrastinate, you overthink, you fantasize instead of act, you withhold instead of express, you scroll instead of feel, you numb instead of connect, and it all feels so rational, so justifiable. I'm tired, I'm busy. It's just a phase. But beneath it is something deeper, something ancient. Resistance. Resistance to life itself. And life doesn't push back. It waits. But slowly it starts to fade. Your eyes lose their spark. Your voice grows distant. You stop expecting anything extraordinary to happen. And that right there, is the cost of disowning your shadow. But Jung didn't leave us there. He didn't just describe the darkness. He offered a path through it. He said that the beginning of transformation is confrontation, that to reclaim your sexual shadow is to reclaim your power. Not the kind of power that dominates or performs, but the kind that knows, the kind that no longer needs outside approval. That doesn't shrink to make others comfortable. That doesn't settle for lifeless intimacy or curate itself for likes. When you know what truly moves you, what turns your soul toward the fire, you become whole. And whole people are magnetic, not because they're loud, but because they're real. You can feel them when they walk into a room. There's no pretense, no facade, just presence. And presence is terrifying, because it reveals everything. You can't hide behind intellectualism anymore. You can't escape into productivity or spiritual bypassing. You have to sit in the raw, trembling honesty of who you are and what you want. You have to grieve the years you spent betraying yourself, the touch you denied, the words you never spoke, the lovers you pushed away because they saw too much. But that grief is sacred. It's not weakness. It's not regression. It's the first act of becoming whole. Because what the world calls darkness, Jung called potential. And the moment you turn toward your shadow, not as an enemy, but as a long-lost part of you, your real life begins. Not the one built on denial, not the one curated for others, but the life that's been waiting underneath all along. Your sexual shadow doesn't need to be fixed. It needs to be faced. Because the only thing more dangerous than your desire is your refusal to meet it. You've spent years, maybe decades, trying to keep this part of you in the dark. You did it to be good, to be accepted, to stay safe. You thought if you tucked it away tightly enough, it would disappear. That desire would shrink. That shame would dissolve. That if you just ignored it long enough, it would lose its grip on your life. But it didn't disappear. It waited. It waited in the background of your conversations, in the moments when you felt nothing, but knew you should feel something, in the relationships where everything looked right, but your soul felt absent. It waited in the fantasies you judged yourself for, in the way you sometimes dissociate when someone tries to love you. It waited every time you chose silence over honesty, and now it wants to be seen, but not to punish you, not to embarrass you, to reunite with you, because your sexual shadow isn't evil, it's unintegrated life. It's the part of your soul that was locked in a box labeled too much, too sensitive, too needy, too wild, too broken. And if you're honest, really honest, you'll admit you've missed that part of you. You've missed being fully here, fully lit up, fully alive. We think the shadow is here to destroy us, but what it really wants is reintegration. The return to a self we never allowed ourselves to become. And until you allow that process, your life will never feel like it's truly yours. You'll live a life of halves, half present, half intimate, half expressive, half fulfilled. Because fragmentation isn't just emotional, it's spiritual. And sexual energy, when repressed, doesn't just impact the bedroom. It seeps into everything. Your confidence, your creativity, your voice, your ability to take up space without apology. Because sexuality is life force. It's the raw, creative current that moves through every aspect of your being. And when it's blocked, the world loses something only you could bring into it. That's why this work is not selfish. It's sacred. When you reclaim your shadow, you reclaim your ability to love without shame, to speak without censoring, to create without fear of being seen. You stop editing yourself to fit someone else's comfort zone. You stop shrinking to make others feel bigger. You stop performing for a world that profits from your confusion. And something incredible happens. You become magnetic, not because you're perfect, but because you're whole. People feel it. Your voice, in your touch, in the way you hold space for others without flinching. You don't need to be right. You don't need to be impressive. You just need to be here. And that presence is rare, precious, healing. But you'll lose people. The moment you reclaim your truth, some relationships will fall away. Not because you did something wrong, but because they were built on your absence, on your compliance, on a version of you that no longer exists. And that grief is real. You'll mourn the roles you played, the spaces where your silence was mistaken for peace, the people who loved your performance but couldn't hold your truth. Let them go, because what's coming is deeper, messier, richer, more alive. A life built not from the outside in, but from the soul outward. And in that life, desire isn't a threat. It's a guide. You'll learn to follow the pull, not blindly, but wisely. You'll stop asking, "Is this normal?" and start asking, "Is this mine?" You'll stop comparing yourself to what others want and start honoring what your body knows. You'll realize that you are not too much. You are just unused to being fully met by yourself and by others. And yes, you will still fall. You'll still make mistakes. You'll still get scared. But now, you won't abandon yourself in the process. You won't run. You won't hide. You'll stay. You'll breathe. You'll feel. That's the mark of integration. Not perfection, but presence. So many people are walking through life afraid of their own power, afraid of being touched too deeply, seen too clearly, felt too intensely. They keep things surface level, manageable, predictable, but the cost is enormous. Because when presence dies, love becomes maintenance, touch becomes task, life becomes logistics. And that's not what you came here for. You came here to burn, to tremble, to awaken, to remember, to create, to hold and be held without shrinking, to desire without shame, to love without leaving yourself behind. So the question is no longer, is there a shadow? The question is, am I willing to stop running? Because it will keep following you. It will appear in your dreams, in your discomfort, in the moments when your life feels strangely hollow, even when everything looks fine. And the longer you avoid it, the louder it will knock. Until one day it doesn't ask anymore. It breaks in. Through crisis, through loss, through unexpected eruptions of emotion. But you don't have to wait for that. You can turn around now. You can walk toward it. You can sit with it in the dark and say, "I see you." And when you do, it will soften. It will show you not just what you feared, but what you've been missing, your vitality, your magic, your deepest knowing. And then, the real life begins.